Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be discussing something that's not usual for this channel, but I'm going to be talking about theming. So one day I was sitting around thinking of some ideas for future videos, and one of them that came to mind was why Verbolten works so much as a coaster and why so many people, including myself, really like it. I mean, like, the ride's in my top 30 or something, and I've heard universal praise for it, but then I actually sat down and thought about it, and honestly, I had no idea why something like Verbolten worked so much, while something like Darkoaster is just mediocre and people really didn't like it. And I mean, like, really didn't like it. And well, I personally did actually like Darkoaster a decent amount. And I mean, there's pretty obvious reasons why it's generally not as liked. I mean, it's a significantly less thrilling coaster. There clearly was less budget. There was less to work with. I think there's also something else. And I think that difference comes with how both of the rides tell their story. So pretty much this video is going to be me analyzing Verbolten and then comparing it to see why Verbolten works and why Darkoaster, could improve in a few places. Okay, now on to Verbolten. On to Verbolten. In my opinion, Verbolten has probably the best storytelling out of any coaster in the entire United States or world. Maybe there's something in Europe that's better. I don't know. Okay, let me differentiate two things quickly. When I'm talking about storytelling, I mean how the ride experience itself and the queue, comes together to tell a comprehensive story in a good manner. That's not to be used with, theming. Something like Guardians of the Galaxy and Epcot, of course, has much better theming than Verbolten, but I honestly think the way Verbolten tells its story, surpasses anything Disney does in the US. But, well, why do I think this? Let's start with the queue. Man, I love the Verbolten queue. It's primarily split into three different sections that each help build up towards the ride experience you're about to go on. The first part with the older office just helps in establishing just the fact that you're going to go on a tour and that it's supposed to be like a nice, cool trip and all that. Nothing too complicated, just some really cool just theming. Not too much to analyze here. Then a little bit farther into the queue, you get into a research area with all these plants and stuff. It has leaves growing everywhere, and there's tapes of people being scared and all in the Black Forest. And this helps to establish a more dark theme to the ride and introduce the idea that, oh no, there might be scary stuff. And for the garage, it mostly just acts as a facade for the station and showing that you're gonna go in a car trip tour thing. So what exactly do I think works so well about the queue? Well, I think it comes down to its really well done wordless storytelling. In the first room, you don't need some stupid pre-show to be oh, you're gonna go on a tour through the Black Forest, have fun. And you don't need another pre-show explaining, oh no, the Black Forest is bad and all, like a lot of other rides, specifically at Disney Universal would do. This allows you to, even if you're just rushing through the queue, to be able to figure out a general premise to the ride and some conflict. And it really helps set up the ride well. Okay, so now time for the ride experience. To begin the ride, you just start outside in the trees with some really lame turns. Naturally, this is supposed to represent the beginning of the trip when you're just going through this random forest. Yay, trees. But then the ride takes a sudden and unexpected turn. You take a swift launch into some strobe lights and branches into the main portion of the ride. This is when the ride begins to take some drops, twists, and turns that are not visible at all right now, but trust me, they're there. This part, yet again, does a pretty good job demonstrating what the story is without actually explaining what the story is. There's a flash that represents lightning, and then there's some trees. Obviously, you're in the dark forest now, and scary stuff is happening. But then you have the peak of scary stuff with the drop track part. In this part, the person in the story, and by extension, the rider, is in a seemingly more safe position, but until one of three possible things happens. There's the spirit of the forest, which is a friendly forest spirit that isn't friendly and attacks the riders or something. There's Big Bad Wolf ending, which is both a callback to the ride that once stood, and also just wolves attack the car. And finally, a thunderstorm ending, where the concept of a thunderstorm is revisited and drops the car down. While all three of them are obviously very interchangeable, it still does a pretty good job of concluding the forest area and just being a good ending to this part of the ride while also being simple to understand and effectively presented. After a short reprieve, the car is then launched out of the drop track, and this is the rider running away from whatever the previous danger was, leading to the climax of the ride, the bridge. So the reasoning behind the bridge within the ride is that the rider obviously escapes from the danger in the previous section, climbs up some hills only to find themselves at the top of a scary, questionably built bridge before dropping off, going through some final turns, and finally making it back to the station, whatever, garage thing. Well, yes, on paper, Verbolten's story is absolutely nothing special, and you don't want to publish that in a book or anything. I think the way it uses the ride experience to tell the story without actually saying any of the part of the story really works great, and I think it achieves this by actually using a story structure known as the Fichtean curve. Okay, I'm not going to make this an English lesson, but here's a picture of it. So, Fichtean curve is basically a story structure that has ebbs and flows to it. That's it. But I feel like Verbolten does this in a way I've seen no other coasters do it. I mean, at the beginning you have the forest and it's all calm. Then you go into the launch and stuff. Then you go right before the drop track where it's calm again. Then you drop. Then you have a break. Then you launch. Then you have a break at the bridge. And then you have the climax before going back to the station. It's a really basic story structure. But I think what separates Verbolten, in my opinion, from pretty much any other coaster is the fact that it has a story structure at all, and that it can get through the story without awkwardly breaking the pacing or having like random super tame segments. The ride is really fun and has a genuine thrill to it, and I feel like it's a balance between that, great base level theming, and never seen before storytelling pretty much, that I think that this ride nails it. And I feel like what brings it all together is the fact that it does it all wordlessly, just using the ride experience. You don't need to have a ride like Guardians of the Galaxy where there's just screens everywhere explaining stuff, or Hagrid's Magical Creature Motorbike Adventure where, again, there's a pre-show and audio throughout the ride that just explains everything that's happening. No shade to those rides though, they look great. So yeah, I think Verbolten pretty much handles this perfectly. Now time to be less positive. It's Darkoaster time. Okay, I want to preface this by saying that I like Darkoaster, probably more than the average person. I think the ride experience is really fun, and there is a lot of theming on this ride. But, yeah, the problem comes with the storytelling. It pretty much does all the things Verbolten does right, but not right. Okay, so rather than, like, Verbolten, by going through the whole ride experience, I'm just going to talk about my major talking points of issue I have with this ride. Okay, so the first major problem with this ride storytelling is the fact that going into the ride, you're expected to already understand the story of Curse of Dark Castle. Well, yes, Dark Castle was a fairly well-liked dark ride in the exact same plot of land in the same castle, and obviously the rides would be related in some way. Having to know the exact story is not exactly the best start for good storytelling. But fear not, Darkoaster has a solution. It's a plaque in the ride queue, which is like a paragraph of text. What riveting storytelling. Also, I'll just say, the queue of this ride is completely unclear. Like, you're just going around a castle, then, like, randomly there's a snowmobile, and, like, skis and stuff, and then, like, there's a painting, and oh no, there's a snowstorm. It's not telegraphed at all that apparently you're going into the castle to save people, I think. But then a storm forms while you're in the castle, which I guess there's a screen telling you that, but it's kind of weird. And then, wow, suddenly you're in the station on snowmobiles. Woohoo. Okay, but maybe the ride experience itself actually tells a cool story once you're actually to the main part of the ride. Maybe just the setup was mediocre. That gets us to problem number 2. I thought it was a snowstorm. Why is there lightning everywhere? Why are there clear rain sound effects? What is happening? It almost feels like the experience you get on the ride is like completely disconnected from everything you've been told so far through the queue and like the fact that you're on snowmobiles. There's just lightning everywhere, and oh, suddenly there's random spooky ghosts that appear. Oh, woohoo, this makes so much sense. Yeah, the ride experience itself is just complete nonsense in the terms of storytelling. It's just like they got random props and screens and effects, and then they just have them on the ride. Well, but maybe the reason that it's like that is because you do 2 laps. I mean, it's very confined in terms of space that you have to go around the ride twice. So yeah, maybe that's why they didn't progress the story much. But that's not the case either, because on the second lap around the track, there's different effects that play, including one that acts as a conclusion. But maybe all this anticipation will be worth it. Maybe the conclusion of the ride's super cool and really brings the story to a conclusion. Let's watch it. Oh, so it was just a mysterious figure that was causing the storm, which is probably King Ludwig, because he disappeared after the events of Curse of Darkoaster, which you could only get if you're waiting in the queue and read the one specific plaque, and then imply that the ghost guy in the storm is King Ludwig, and then there's no solution. Does the ride end with you dying? Is it like Wicker Man, or are you escaping the storm like the subtitle suggests? What is happening? Oh, I see what's happening. They ran out of budget.
So we took the original Dark Castle experience and the King Ludwig that you know from that experience and rethought how we can make him a reinterpretation in modern times.
Yeah, quotes like the ones I just played and others in the behind-the-scenes Darkoaster videos make it pretty clear that they were having some constraints, because the entirety of the interpretation of King Ludwig into modern times is what's in this concept art. It is not developed any further. And I want to make it clear, I'm not blaming any of the Busch Gardens executives, the park itself, and especially any of the creatives who worked on this ride for the way it turned out. And admittedly, it didn't turn out too bad. It's a pretty okay ride. But just when you see how great something like Verbolten is, it just highlights the weaknesses of this. So while clear effort was put in many facets of this ride, the lack of a cohesive story or a well-told story is what I think brings the ride down in both public perception and just general quality. Okay, that's pretty much it for this video. I just had an idea and I wanted to talk about it. Again, I want to make it abundantly clear that I have no hate for Darkoaster, and especially no worked on it. I still think the ride is really good, and I have a lot of respect for it. It just clearly had some issues, and I just wanted to speak on it. Credit to all of the original providers for these videos, notably a lot of videos from Busch Gardens Williamsburg. All of the resources I used will be linked down below. And, oh god, there's a POV of Pantheon playing. Pantheon's theming, am I right? But yeah, like and subscribe if you feel like it. If you don't. Bye.